Good afternoon, Chair. Chair, this afternoon we're going to hear from Sophia Di Moglo, who is going to give evidence about her mother, Valerie. So may the witness be sworn, please.
I, Sophia Di Moglo, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Sophia Di Moglo.
You have asked that during the course of your evidence I call you Sophia. Are you happy with that? Sophia, you're here to tell us today about what happened to your mother, Valerie Di Moglo. You made a statement about that, and I think there in front of you, you have a copy of it, is that right? Yeah. If you go to the very last page, I think it's 59 pages long or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Do you see your signature underneath a declaration of truth? Maybe on the page before.
You want me to sign it?
No, I just for you to identify your signature and the declaration of truth on the final page.
Okay.
Maybe try.
Is there a signature somewhere?
Try the page before.
It says there is a signature, but it just says I/S.
You're absolutely right. You've got it's a redacted version of the statement. Do you see there is a redacted version of the statement with a declaration of truth?
Yes.
It's dated the 12th of May, 2025.
Yes.
Do you still stand by the contents of the statement you made for this inquiry?
I do.
Can I just make clear for the record, all of that statement will be taken into account as your evidence about what happened to your mother, even if there are parts that we don't get to or read out this afternoon. Can I then turn, please, to your mother, Valerie, who I think was also known as Val? And you have indicated, I think, that you would like us to call her Val during the course of your giving evidence.
We called her Val, the children.
You are one of Val's 4 children. You have an older brother, Andrew, a younger sister, Nicola, and a younger brother, Pablo.
Yeah.
Just really by way of background, Sophia, you have already given evidence to the inquiry. You gave a very powerful commemorative statement about Val last September in Chelmsford. The inquiry was very grateful to you for that account. And you told us during the course of that account that you had a happy childhood. You're nodding. I may have to ask you occasionally to say yes, just for the transcript purposes. Thank you. You were all very close to your mother.
Yes.
And as we will hear in a moment, you were all involved in her care as far as you could be in the period we're talking about.
Yes.
I think, as a matter of fact, Nicola lived closer geographically.
Yeah, in the same town.
But that you would travel from where you lived to be part of that as well when you could.
Yes.
I won't ask you to turn to it, but in paragraph 291 of this statement, you say some more beautiful words about your mother. You say she was a girl full of dreams of seeing the world, a mother devoted to her family and determined to give all 4 of us and our dog the best of life. We wanted her to know how much she'd accomplished and what a brilliant person she was, and we did our best to do this right to the end.
Yes.
And that's what you're going to tell us about this afternoon.
Okay.
Val was born on the 15th of August 1939, and she died on the 9th of October 2015 at her home address.
Yes.
And I think we can all have in mind that that was just over 10 years ago last week. She was 76.
She was.
and she had taken an overdose of medication. And in circumstances we will come to in a moment, she was found by your sister.
She was.
At the time she died, Val was an inpatient at the Heneage ward at the Kingswood Centre or Kingswood Medical Centre, often called different things, in Colchester. And the Heneage ward is an older adult inpatient ward.
Yes.
Now, given the dates, it's perhaps right that we should make clear for the record that at the time your mother was an inpatient in the Heneage ward, it was part of the North Essex Partnership University Foundation Trust, because we know, don't we, that after that time, that trust merged with another to become EPUT.
It did.
The admission that took place in, well, the mission of 2015 was Val's second admission to the Heneage ward.
Yes.
She'd had 2 relatively lengthy periods of admission in the Heneage ward. The first was between January 2014 and August 2014, is that right?
Yes.
And then the second admission was from October 2014 to the time of her overdose and sad death in October 2015.
Yeah.
So it was almost a year to the day. We'll come back to that in a moment. Now, again, we'll come on to the details in a moment, but just to summarise the position, from about June, July 2015, when your mother was an inpatient on the Heneage ward, there were discussions about discharging Val from that ward. I think there were discussions from earlier, but they started building up in about June, July 2015.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
This culminated in Val being seen by a ward manager on the 6th of October 2015. Yes?
Yes.
And then by her psychiatrist, who we will call Dr. A for the
Right.
purpose of the proceedings, on the 7th of October.
Mm-hmm.
And is this an accurate summary? She was extremely anxious about the prospect of being discharged from that ward.
Yes.
And she was, in that October time, and we'll come to it in a bit, expressing suicidal ideation.
She was, yeah.
We will hear from you shortly that her observation levels had been increased
Yes.
and then were decreased shortly afterwards. On the 9th of October, she was granted a period of extended leave. And during that leave, she took the opportunity to return to her home address and take the overdose, of which we've heard. Again, you're nodding.
Sorry, yes,
No,
she did.
it's difficult, and there I am speaking. And, but if you could say yes for the transcript, that would be much appreciated. Now, the way I'm going to ask you to approach your evidence is that we're going to go through, from just before that first admission, a chronology of what happened to Val. But before I ask you those details, I'm going to ask or outline with you, if I may, the concerns that you and your family have raised about Val's care and her treatment whilst an inpatient under the care of NEPT. And I'm going to ask you to do that so that we can all have them in our mind whilst you take us through the chronology in a moment. And if I'm summarising any of these inaccurately, please stop me or correct me. In terms of the concerns expressed by you and your family, you are concerned that Val herself was not properly involved in the decision-making around her care and treatment.
Yes.
You are concerned that her family, that being you and your siblings, were not involved in the decision-making surrounding her care and treatment.
Correct.
In addition, you would add that you were not given sufficient information about her treatment and what was happening to her generally on a day-to-day basis.
True, yep.
You are concerned about how she was treated on the ward by certain members of staff.
Yes, definitely.
And you are concerned generally, more generally, about the lack of compassion and dignity that was being afforded to the inpatients at this time.
Yes.
Later on, you consider that Val was pressured or bullied even towards discharge.
Definitely.
You also consider that there were safety and or safeguarding issues on the ward.
Definitely.
And you are concerned that there was no awareness or a lack of awareness around the need to keep voluntary patients just as safe, if I can put it that way, as involuntary patients.
Yes.
You are concerned about the adequacy of some of the assessments that were undertaken in relation to your mother across the period.
Yes.
You are concerned as to Val's diagnosis, or lack of settled diagnosis, I think you would say.
Yes.
You're concerned about the medication she was receiving, or the lack of apparent strategy to that medication.
Yes.
You are very concerned about the care plans, or the lack of quality of the care plans, or the lack of care plans sometimes at all,
Yes.
or apparent lack. You have expressed grave concerns in your statement around the arrangements or the lack of arrangements toward Val's discharge, which were ongoing.
Yes.
And you are concerned about the arrangements or lack of arrangements, as you perceive them, for giving or granting Val leave from the ward, and in particular on the 9th of October 2015. Yes. And to conclude, you are deeply distressed and concerned by the behaviour and the attitude of the Trust after Val had died.
Definitely.
And can I break that into three main parts, really, and we'll come back to it in your evidence. You're concerned about the nature of the serious incident investigation and the circumstances in what I might call the more immediate aftermath. You're concerned about the behaviour at the inquest of the Trust.
Yes.
And you are concerned about what you see to have been continuing defensive behaviour, which took place in a meeting that we'll come to some 3 years or so later.
Yes.
All right. Can I take you back a little bit, if I may, to help us with some of the chronology in that period leading up to Val's death? Now, the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to tell you where the various parts are in your statement. You can go to them, you can expand on them, and we'll do it in that way. It may mean we jump around a little bit in order to pull it together for a chronology. But let's see how we go. You explain, and I'm just going to deal with the background, if I may, for a moment, and for your reference and for anybody following by the way of statement, this is paragraph 13. You explain at paragraph 13 of your statement that Val had been under the care of a psychiatrist that we're calling Dr. A since about 2009. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think you make the point there, and you stress it several times in your statement, and I think it helps us get the measure of Val as a person, that she was over-deferential, I think those are the words you use,
Yeah.
to doctors, particularly in the early days.
I'm just going to move my chair in, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, she was.
Are you all right? Have you got enough space?
It's just I'm aware of the microphones and I'm sitting quite far back.
Okay. Sorry, I was asking you about her being over-deferential to doctors.
Yeah, so she thought that they were always right.
And you pinpoint, I think, mid-2013 as the time that you describe, and this is for anybody following paragraph 15, as a crisis point in her mental health.
Yeah, when she just wasn't herself at all. She couldn't really function day to day properly.
There is a later report, I think, when she sees a psychologist, we'll come back to that again in a moment, where she describes, I think, having been lying under a blanket for six weeks around that time, only getting up to take the dog out, for example. Is that the kind of presentation?
Yeah. I'd go and see her because I lived away, but she was just shaking all the time and really distressed. And it's about that time I said I went to the doctors and tried to insist that I talk to a doctor on her behalf because it was just ongoing and it was a real crisis.
And I think you did talk to a doctor. And as a result of your efforts, ultimately, Dr. A, the psychiatrist that we know who, under whose care she was, referred Val to a psychologist for some talking therapies.
I didn't talk to a doctor. They wouldn't talk to me. I talked to a receptionist.
So yes, sorry, it was your. I meant it was your effort, but you went to the surgery to try and chivvy up this referral. We'll call the psychologist B for the same reasons as we're calling Dr. A. But I think it's right that Val had been waiting or was waiting for that referral for some time.
Yeah, months.
And you mention in your statement that in the past, I think, and we don't need to go to it specifically, that Val did have experience, for example, of cognitive behavioural therapies and those kind of therapies.
Yeah, they'd worked for her. They'd helped her a lot.
But as you say, she waited for a long time. You chased it up, and she first saw the psychologist, I think, on the 6th of December 2013.
Yeah, so it'd been at least 6 months.
Yeah. One of the things that you say, with hindsight, is unfortunate about that appointment is that the psychologist had a trainee, as often is the case, with her on that day. Why do you think that was unfortunate?
Well, Val couldn't really cope with lots. She was quite private, so she didn't really want to tell people how she was feeling. And she was absolutely desperate. So we didn't know quite how bad she was because she didn't want to tell us everything. So she really wanted to be able to tell one person. And also, because she had a little bit of a fear of authority, I think. If someone was in there taking notes, then she didn't know exactly what was going to happen with those notes. Whether or not they just explained it to her, she still felt uncomfortable. And also, I don't know how young the trainee was, but my mum probably did feel a bit like she just wanted to tell the professional, not someone who was training. But she wasn't confident enough when she was asked, do you mind? She wasn't confident enough, like a lot of us aren't, to say, no, I don't want them in here. So she definitely told us that she didn't speak openly at that meeting.
That was the initial meeting with the psychologist.
Well, she said she didn't speak openly, but I do remember that from the notes it did say that Val was a high risk of suicide at that time, so that did come out in the meeting.
And I think it came out that there was, as you say, there was discussion around suicidal ideation in that meeting with the psychologist.
Yes.
Now, we remind ourselves that was the 6th of December, 2013. On the 7th of December, there was an accident. Val crashed her car.
She did.
And that was a deliberate crash.
Yeah, into a moving lorry.
And as a result of that, and just for again, the record and those following, this is paragraph 20 of your statement, she sustained serious injuries, I think burns, fractured hip, and significantly, one of her much-loved dogs didn't survive that accident.
No, that's true. There was also a BBC crew following the car just by chance, and they filmed what happened, which is probably still on the internet. So that was on the internet almost instantly because it was on the news. So they didn't film the crash, they filmed her being treated at the side of the road.
The aftermath. She was, as you say, very badly hurt, but survived that crash. And after treatment for her physical injuries, she was ultimately admitted to the Heneage ward on the 8th of January 2014. Does that sound right?
Yes.
I think, to be fair, you had to chase that up. You had to engage Dr. A to become involved.
Yeah, without going into loads of detail, the physical injuries were profound, burned, the car set on fire. So she was really badly burned, broke her hip, so loads of stuff had gone wrong. Dog was dead. So the psychological stuff deepened, like it became absolutely intense. Not one person in one of the hospitals dealt with the psychological. She was in 3 different hospitals. So nobody talked about the psychological stuff. And when she eventually got moved to Colchester General, they put her in a room on her own, which was absolutely not the best thing to do for her. So the bit when she was on her own, it was really dangerous. And then eventually, I was like, why hasn't Dr. A been in touch? I knew where he was. He was literally 100 yards away or something. I don't get it. So I kept ringing his office. They just kept saying he can't talk. And that's when I said, I'm definitely going to put in a complaint. Then he turned up.
And ultimately, sorry to cut across you, but ultimately then she was admitted to the Heneage ward in the
Yeah, so
January.
he came to the hospital and saw her in person and, was kind then. And I think he saw that maybe as a way to help her through the next stage, was to put her into this ward. And it was all on his doing. I mean, he had the power to find her a place. So that's when she went into there.
Once she was on the ward, I think it's also right, and you deal with this at your paragraph 32, that she was seen again by the psychologist, by psychologist B, as we've been calling the psychologist. And on the 6th, the next appointment was the 16th of January, where Val described feeling in agony and how she regretted surviving her suicide attempt.
Yeah.
And at that stage, even at that stage, she raised fears about not wanting to go back to her home.
Yeah, she was terrified about going back.
You tell us in your statement at paragraph 33 that overall, Val had 45 sessions of therapy with the psychologist. Does that sound
I think
about
that
right?
was what was in the records.
You also explain in your statement, again for the record, this is your paragraph 75, that during the course of this first admission, Val felt she could be sent home at any time. She was worried she'd be sent home at any time without planning or discussion with her and her family.
Yeah, most of all of the hospital moves had happened really suddenly, sometimes like really late at night. And it was just suddenly like, that's it, now you're moving to this place, or now you're moving to that place. So she thought that that was the style and that was what was going to happen next, that the next thing would be you're just going to go home.
Can I just clarify that with you? By the hospital moves, you mean the moves when she was being treated for her physical injuries?
Well, from Addenbrooke's, the first one was Ipswich, when there was an emergency. They took her to Addenbrooke's, Cambridge. And then the Addenbrooke's move happened like Christmas Eve, but really suddenly she got taken to Colchester. And then the move from Colchester into the Heneage ward, again, she was told at like 9 o'clock at night or something, it was really late.
And then they moved her straight away that night?
And then she just had to go, she basically had to walk across the car park to the next place.
I think your brother came at short
My
notice
brother
to
came,
help
yeah.
with that, is that right? So that was her, in terms her first admission, and she was discharged from that first admission in the August 2014.
Yes.
How did that come about?
I think there'd been talk about that she couldn't stay there and that she was presenting a little bit better. And she was taking kind of issue with how much medication she was being given. And she decided that she wanted to try and live without so much medication. And that wasn't really the style. So she kind of felt that it was time for her to do something for herself, rather than, because she just sort of felt that she was just turning into kind of a medicated person in the Heneage ward. And that she was also worried that, because they'd been saying to her, you can't stay here. So she sort of, I'm pretty sure she discharged herself at that point.
Can I just ask you about what isn't a short intervening period? Because we know that she goes back into the Heneage ward in the October of 2014. She was discharged, or she left the ward, and she had the support of the home treatment team. That was the plan, and the community team. August to October, just thinking back, can I ask you, how was Val in that intervening period to begin with when she came out?
Yeah, there were moments that she was brilliant. She did a garden. She had 2 dogs. One of them survived. she didn't feel that she could have the other dog back. That was too stressful for her. She did feel a lot of, she'd go up and down, so she'd feel a lot of guilt about being in the house, because obviously that's where she made the decision to get into a car and take the dogs with her. So that was really hard for her. She had little things like, she had a cleaner came who was from Brazil, I think, and she was like really lively and brilliant person. And my mum really liked people around that didn't know all the horrible stuff. So she was really good for my mum. But she left in October. She'd left town altogether. That was quite hard for Val. And she also, like, I've got a cousin, and the cousin visited her. So that was my mum's sister's daughter, the sister that died on the same day that she died, basically. And so she went to visit her, and I remember Val saying it was like a breath of fresh air to have my cousin there. And so there were moments like that felt really positive, and she definitely wasn't in the same fog of medication.
Can I ask you about that? Sorry to interrupt you, because you did talk about the fact that she didn't want to be medicated, and you thought she wanted to do something for herself and come off the medication. As far as you're aware, and I'm talking about this period, August to October 2014, did your mum come off? Did Val come off any of the medication?
As far as I'm aware, she did come off everything.
Do you think that was managed or done herself?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the home treatment team. They were just a non-entity to us. And Val didn't engage with them. She didn't like them individually. Like they hadn't really made a lot of effort to be trusted by her, if you see what I'm saying. She didn't really like people in her house anyway. I can't even remember the dates fully, but I'd met one of them who was quite offhand, and I hadn't met her formally, I just bumped into her. So there was a lot of kind of strangeness about what is this care in the community situation. So I wouldn't say that they were assisting. They were, I think there was occasionally they would call her or try and arrange to go around, but she would try and keep them on the doorstep. I think once they went in, and the record of that, I remember reading, was not very nice. They said something about our house not being clean, which I thought it was, the house was fine. Cleaner than mine. So it did feel like, I thought she was coping really well, but the home treatment team seemed as if they just had some standard things that they would say. And the medication, it felt like she had stopped, but she didn't really talk about it. It definitely wasn't a managed stop.
Can I just take you back again to that intervening period? Because we know, and we'll come on to it in a moment, that she went back into Heneage Ward on the 10th of October, and she was seen by Dr. A again on the 7th. There had been, by the 7th of October, a decline, which we will come on to. There was another trigger, I think, in the intervening period. Did your mum receive a letter that caused her great upset?
Yeah, so she had a letter from the RAC, who were her insurance company, and basically they'd said that they were going to charge her something like £5,000 because of the crash, and they'd already dealt with the insurance, everything had all been dealt with, so it all finished, and then it just came up again. And then she was devastated about that, and obviously it triggered her for the memory, but also she couldn't afford it to pay. I think my sister rang the insurance company and said, "What are you doing?" And they just said, "Sorry, it was a mistake." So the letter was actually a mistake. They didn't want to claim any money back off her, but it sent her spinning, really.
At paragraph 35 of your statement, again, I say for the record, you talk about how in correspondence, Dr. A makes reference to Val's decline following the demand for a significant sum of money. So the
right,
mistake
yeah.
or not, the effect had taken place, as you say, on Val. Can I then ask you about the assessment on the 7th of October 2014 with Dr. A? As part of that, again, I'll remind you what's in your statement. Please feel free to go to it if you want to. Dr. A, I think you say in your statement, noted that Val had already had a protracted admission to the Heneage ward, which was the January to the August, and that he himself stated that she didn't seem to be making progress on antidepressants. Do you recall that?
That she didn't.
That she didn't seem to have been making progress on the antidepressants.
Yeah, I mean, a number of times it was pointed out that she was still suicidal and that the antidepressants weren't changing the fact that she felt suicidal.
We'll come back to the medication in a moment because your concern is that they were exacerbating that, in fact, I think.
Yes.
But just talking in terms of Val's going back into the Heneage ward, you also explain in your statement at paragraph 78 that since that time you've seen Val's inpatient care plan, which sheds some further light onto why she was readmitted, or Dr. A suggests she be readmitted, and that the notes say she'd been doing well with home support from her care coordinator. Her mood deteriorated, they experienced high levels of anxiety, and there was concern that Val had missed appointments, one with the home treatment, one with a care coordinator, and there was a concern she was disengaging with the service, which is consistent with the observation you've just made, that she didn't seem to want to have much to do with them and she wanted to keep them on the doorstep.
Definitely, yeah.
Later you say that the family weren't involved, and I think you say that you only met one once, and that was by accident or by chance.
Yeah, there was absolutely no liaising with us about the best way to help her at home.
I think you've already referred to the fact that the notes you saw were a bit blunt and not very kind, and you make reference to the house and the cleanliness
Yes.
of the house. And did you have concerns then about the level of engagement from the care coordinator about how this was all being organised?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I did have one person's number, but they never contacted me. And if I tried to contact them, I'd normally just get like a voicemail or something. So there was no, this is how Val's feeling, what can we do to help her? They were doing something in the background. Val was pretty much trying to avoid them, I think. And then obviously it all came to a head with the letter.
I just want to jump ahead a little bit in your statement because, of course, this is Val's experience of discharge that we're dealing with now, and it's obviously relevant when we come to later on. And in your statement at 243, paragraph 243, you actually make reference to Val feeling, you say, unsupported, misunderstood, and even bullied by the community teams.
Yeah, one of the community nurses was a man, and she found him quite intimidating and quite unpleasant. Again, I saw him once in a room with lots of other people, but he never introduced himself to me, or... It just feels, for me, it would be like your elderly parent, they're trying to help her to get back into the community. Talk to us, meet with us, arrange a meeting with Val there and talk about what's happening, rather than this all somehow happening in the distance. I know I lived away, but my sister was local. She could have got involved as well.
I think, again, at paragraph 244, you say, and of course we bear in mind this is your experience of, if you like, life post-discharge, that there was no continuity and no oversight. That was your sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I just, before we deal with what is Val's second admission, and just keeping with the chronology, it's right, I think, that you wanted a second opinion in relation to Val's mental health.
Yeah, so obviously our whole life we'd know that she'd had sort of mental health issues. She'd had really bad PMT as I was growing up. So there were definitely things that we knew. There was never one diagnosis. There was always various things. And I think I list them in my statement, like depressive disorder. Someone had written borderline personality disorder. I'm like, what does that even mean? And then I'd obviously thought, well, could she be bipolar? Because she was like really happy and then really down. nobody really just seemed interested. And I mean, it was almost like they said, well, she's got some kind of depression. We can't really diagnose it. And there was never a proper diagnosis.
Just fitting this then into the chronology, we know that Val saw Dr. A, on the 7th of October. And as it happens, the second opinion from Dr. C was following an assessment on the 8th of October. So very close in time together. And you went to that assessment, and I think the issues listed as to be discussed were, as you say, potential for bipolar disorder, because that was something that you were concerned about, her risk of suicide, and also I think lithium treatment or as a medication was also discussed at that.
Well, yeah, just what is the medication if she did have a diagnosis of bipolar? What would the medication be? Would it be a different course of treatment to this kind of quite ad hoc antidepressants that was going on? Is there a more kind of defined strategy if you've got that diagnosis to a different one? Could there be a misdiagnosis? What's going on?
And just to summarise then the second opinion you got from Dr. C, he noted that she had depression. He noted that there were indications of mood instability, including some hypomanic features, but he didn't consider that the diagnosis of bipolar disorder was warranted.
No, he said no.
He considered and noted that the antidepressants had mixed results.
Yeah.
Which is how you describe it, and discussed lithium with Val, lithium being a mood stabilizer, as you've identified, sometimes prescribed to those with bipolar disorder. But Val declined lithium at that stage in the October.
Yeah, she didn't really want any more drugs, and she didn't want anything that sounded a bit scary, which lithium does. So she just didn't want any more of anything. She just wanted to feel that she was safe.
And Dr. C recommended ongoing monitoring and psychological support to help manage what you've stated in your statement he described as Val's moderate to high suicide risk.
Moderate to high, yeah.
And I think you also explain in your statement that Val was keen to transfer her care to Dr. C. Is that?
I mean, I wouldn't say keen.
Sorry, that's probably my word.
Yeah,
Apologies.
I mean, it's okay. She wasn't really keen, but the way she expressed it, because she obviously felt she didn't want to get on the bad side of Dr. A, because she felt that he was the one in control, which he did seem to be. And so she was, again, like really apologetic. And I think we wrote a letter, like she wrote a sort of a letter saying that it's not because of you, just want to try and move on from everything that's happened and it might give me a fresh start. So she actually did express that and thanked him for what he'd done.
Was there a transfer as such?
It was just a mess, to be honest. I mean, I don't feel that Dr. C even wanted to take my mum on. I had high hopes that it was going to be a different approach, but he just seemed like another version of the other person. They just were really cold, and they just, when I was asking questions or saying anything, they just looked at me as if to say, well, who are you? What do you know? We're the experts. So I was really disappointed, because I just felt like there was just a disinterest, if I'm honest. That's what it amounted to. It just didn't feel like they were really trying to investigate who she was and how they could treat her.
That's the same for Dr. A and Dr. C.
It was, yeah. It felt there was maybe 10 minutes in one of the assessments. They were both quite good at being softly spoken and expressing like kind sentiments, but then the medication would be ramped up, or I would just feel like we'd gone into the same void that we're in before.
Can I just pick up on something you said about diagnosis? Because we outlined at the outset that was one of your concerns, was that you just felt that nobody had got to the bottom of what was what the correct diagnosis was. And you've already said how it was given various names: depression, depressive disorder, that there was acknowledgement of the up and down moods. Sorry, that's me summarising. And the references you've already said to borderline personality disorder. And you just said in your evidence, what does that even mean, or what even is that? Can I just pick up on that? Did anybody take time, did you feel, to explain the differences between these potential diagnoses?
No,
Or
I mean,
what the
no one
differences
even
were?
talked to us. They didn't talk to us about anything. Even if I pressed them in a room when I actually had them there, which was very rare, they would just say it's depression, and that's kind of like a broad spectrum of things. So obviously I didn't like that sound of borderline personality disorder. I'm like, well, that makes it sound like she's psychotic. What does that even mean? But they said, oh, well, now we're calling it this. So it just felt like it just shifted.
Can I then move us to when she is readmitted to Heneage Ward, which you've said is the 10th of October. Now, just to be clear for the record, and I'm looking at your paragraph 79, again, for those who are following it, she was reluctant to be readmitted, but she did agree to be readmitted. Have I summarised that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, a lot of things we've talked about, we've, you know, even like moving from one hospital to another, every single thing was massively traumatic. So none of this was, oh, then she was admitted. Every single time she went anywhere, it was huge. And I'd got a phone call at work, teaching in Sussex, that my mum had been asking the neighbour for pills, because the neighbour was a nurse.
Yeah.
So that neighbour rang me.
Yes.
I don't think she could get my sister. So I literally left work. I don't think I got someone to look after my daughter. I think I just went straight away. So when I got there, the kind of medical team had turned up. The neighbour was out. My mum was on the door. It was all like nightmarish. And it was basically either you're going to be sectioned or you're going to come voluntarily. So it was that kind of thing. And my mum was really distressed, but sort of said, well, I don't have any choice, do I? She didn't want to go. And it was like, well, you have been talking about actively trying to kill yourself.
I think you say in your statement she'd asked the neighbour if she knew the best way or something.
Yeah, if
of
she
that
knew the
nature.
best way, and sort of suggested that she might be able to get her some tablets. Which, can I just say as well that, to me, because it isn't that difficult to go to a number of different chemists and buy whatever to then take a load of pills. You can do it. I know you can't buy them all in one, but I think to me it was another indication that Val didn't really want to kill herself. She really wanted someone to help her. Because she knew enough that she could have done something. So she was talking about it rather than doing it, which again, to me, made it feel like she just didn't want to really kill herself at that point.
Hence the engagement of the neighbour on that particular occasion.
Yeah.
One of the concerns you raise, and you've just touched on it in your statement, is whether Val should have been sectioned when she was admitted to hospital. And we've already heard that there was discussion about whether she should be sectioned, but she agreed to go and was, in effect, compliant. You also observe, however, that she was very fearful of being sectioned.
Well, being sectioned always meant, historically, it felt like that meant you were going to get the electric shock treatment. I mean, it felt like, for her, that would mean, you know, the white coat and all the tiny down. She felt that being sectioned was really like a hefty kind of thing. And again, no one really talked about what the difference was. Even to me, they didn't really talk about it. I'd done a little bit of research at that point. And in terms of my own, I didn't know. I really didn't know. I thought the experts would talk to us about what it meant. I just felt like she had to be protected from herself. And also that the general public had to be protected, because obviously she'd driven into a lorry. That's quite intense to be that bad, to feel that mentally unwell, that's something you would do, put other people at risk. So it felt like whatever it needed to be, but we didn't really know what it meant either. And also we'd grown up not trying to thwart what my mum wanted. So she had a bit of a saying, don't tell me what to do. So that was a moment, that's like the worst thing you could do, is saying, right, we're saying we want you to be sectioned. So we just kind of let the process happen. And she did go in.
She went in, as you say, voluntarily, but you refer in your statement to being concerned that perhaps, as you say, she should have been sectioned, but that nobody really talked to you about what that would mean or why that hadn't happened, or...
I still don't know. Yeah, I still don't know why that wasn't a discussion and an option.
One of the concerns that you've outlined in your statement in several places is that you are concerned that if she had been sectioned, if she'd been an involuntary patient, you think that may have changed the way she was looked after or kept safe.
Well, it's quite interesting, because I just had the thought now that if she'd have been sectioned, they would have had to do observations on her. And it's a little bit odd that she's asking a neighbour, basically, to help her find a way to kill herself. But then she's not put on observations, because she's just taken in at that point. And I don't think that she was put on the 15-minute observations. But also from the point of view of us, what we're, like anyone who's ever lived with suicidal loved ones, you're constantly worried that you might say something that might trigger suicide. So you don't want to be the person that says, Val, you need to be sectioned for your own safety, because that might have made her more determined to end her life. So it's quite a balancing act.
Can I just turn to when she then gets to the ward? This is a slightly separate topic that you have dealt with in your statement, and it's about safety and safeguarding on the ward when she gets there, because one of the things that you are concerned about, and you make reference, is, as you say, whether or not it would have been different, certainly in the early part, if she'd been sectioned. But just more generally, you acknowledge, I think, or you say in your statement, that Val had concerns sometimes about safety on the ward, for example, in relation to the mixed-gender toilets. Was that something she was worried about?
Yeah, she didn't like that. I mean, there were men and women on the ward, and she didn't like the fact that the men could wander about. I think, like, a couple of times someone had, like, walked into her room.
I think another cause for concern was that Val's room, you tell us in your statement, was on the ground floor and next to a very busy road.
Yeah.
And that in August 2015, somebody climbed through her window and stole her bag, which had money in it.
She wasn't in the room, but when she went back in, her bag had been stolen from the room. She'd locked it from the outside. So
when you say she'd locked it, she'd locked the room
from the outside.
The door to the room.
Yeah, or there was some. She knew that it had been done from inside because the window was open. She always had the windows open a bit, but she didn't realise that one of the windows was broken.
I was going to come on to that, because someone, I think, was eventually caught and prosecuted for that theft.
Yeah.
Right? And it turned out that the window in the room the window of this ground floor room was faulty.
Yeah,
which
it was
meant
a
someone
faulty
could come in.
window, and people could get in. It was very close to the main road.
Can I just ask you this? Were you, or your brother or your sister, or any of your family, told that somebody had climbed into your mother's room and stolen her handbag?
No, we weren't told anything. We weren't contacted in any way, and we only found out because my sister went to pick my mum up. My mum had actually started meeting us outside the ward for, I'm not entirely sure.
I'm going to come to that in a moment. So
there was some weirdness going on at this point where we'd been very much inside the ward. Even my daughter, who was kind of not legally allowed in, came in at first. So it was sort of almost like a little family to go and see Val. And then we sort of felt like we weren't welcome on the ward, but Val also seemed to keep us out. But my sister did go inside because she realised that Val was really distressed, and it was only when she was saying what's happened, Val seems really distressed, that then they said there'd been a burglary. But that had been like a number of days before.
You've, I think, seen medical notes since which refer to this being discussed with Val by I think the clinical manager or the matron. And you noted that during the course of the conversation about the bag having been stolen and the open window, that formed part of a conversation about how Val's house hunting was going.
Yeah, so Val had started telling us around this point that she was being bullied by the ward manager and the what are we calling them? Matron.
The matron.
Clinical manager. And so we didn't not believe her, but obviously she was highly medicated, and I wouldn't say paranoid, but when people are like on drugs, they often do present as a little bit paranoid. So we were a bit
with caution what she was saying.
yeah. So we were trying to monitor it, but again, we weren't. Not that we weren't allowed in, but when we were in, we weren't having the conversations that we used to have. We used to go into the office and have a conversation, what's been going on, how things are. That all stopped. So they were keeping us at arm's length as well. So we didn't really see them. I've lost my thread. What was the question?
I was asking you if you'd since seen some medical notes,
Oh, yes.
which suggested to you that this had formed part of a conversation with your mother, at which point she'd been asked how her house hunting was going.
Yeah, so my sister and I especially were talking about, well, what do you think is going on? And we had said that one of them we did feel uneasy about, and we were trying to monitor it, but it was hard. And so it wasn't until after Val died that we saw the medical notes, which also took months for them to get to us. Yes. That was another layer of stress. And when we got those medical notes, that one in particular, we just were like, I cannot believe it. So the medical note for that conversation between the matron and the clinical manager and Val was the police had been called to the hospital, was her, and all this had happened without us knowing about it. So the police had been called, and then they were talking to her after it, and she had actually recorded what she'd said, and she put on it that I had the conversation about what the police had said, and then I took the opportunity, I'm sure she's used those words, to ask Val about her discharge plans. And I was really stunned, because that did amount to, when are you leaving? You know, almost as if to say, not as if, as if the bit between the lines is, well, it's not really safe, is it? Because someone's climbed into your room. When are you going somewhere else? Rather than, how awful, we're really sorry, that's something that we've got to deal with. So, yeah, that was the push. And that was the push. Every single thing that ever happened after that we saw in the notes.
Just on the safety point for a moment, and we will come back to those other parts of the notes you've seen. You were also concerned, for the record, that she was, as a voluntary patient, she was allowed to take things back onto the ward, and I think you list her having cans and tins and knives and bleach, all of which worried you.
Val, she didn't really like their food that much, but she did like food still. And she had loads of tinned fish. And those, you pull the thing back, don't you? And they're really, really sharp, the edges. So she had, she must have had like 10 tins of fish in her wardrobe. And she did, I said, if no one said anything, and I think she said that someone had joked about it once, one of the staff members. So they definitely knew that was happening. And you would know it was happening because the room absolutely stank of fish or bleach. And she had the bleach thing under the sink because she'd like bleach things, and she'd do her own washing in the sink. So she used bleach a lot. And she would cut up...
in her own room?
In her room.
Yes.
But the staff obviously would go in there. Well, and as I pointed out, the door wasn't always locked. Other people could get into that room as well, whether it's from the door or the window. So it wasn't, I was shocked, but at that point we felt that Val was kind of getting on okay. She was finding the ward quite interesting, and so reporting your own mum for taking in a knife and some tins of fish didn't seem like a good idea.
I think in your statement you suggest that she liked being self-sufficient, and she enjoyed, you've just said, getting food for herself. What would have been her reaction, do you think, if anybody had tried to stop her from having tinned fish and bleaching?
She would have been depressed. She would have been really depressed. Because she was always, like, scared of authority, but did break the rules. I think she quite liked breaking the rules. So she probably would have felt a bit like, I've been caught, I'll have to stop now. And maybe she would have, I don't know. That was at a time when she was really avoiding going to her own house at all. So the fact that she felt like her room for a couple of months was her home, it did feel like it was for a little while, that kept her quite stable. So if that had been taken away, I think it would have sent her into that kind of instability again.
Thank you.
Can I just pick up on that? Thank you, Chair. Because when you returning to the chronology now and picking up on the question that Chair has asked you, we do see, don't we, from your statement, for example, your paragraph, I think 105 and 22, just for those that are following, that you consider that Val did make progress while she was on that ward. You're just talking about how she'd become stable and her room had become her home. And you think, I think you say at 105, that you feel her recovery was assisted on the ward.
Yeah, there were certain months, not the very beginning, which was quite dark, but then she engaged in some of the sort of social things, or there was one woman who did, they'd talk about the news, what was in the news, and Val was really interested in reading newspapers, so she really engaged with that. Val also loved playing Scrabble, and she would get the other people. It was almost like Val was working there at one point, because she'd always wanted to do sort of voluntary work. So for a few months, it felt like that Val was a sort of a helper. And she even talked about, well, we sort of talked about it with her as well, about if she went out, maybe she could do some sort of outreach work with people, because she really liked helping people. And food was a really big thing for her. So I remember once I went and she wanted me to get her some fish and chips. And I went, but she got me to buy somebody else some chips. Somebody asked, could I have some chips? And so I think I was allowed to take them in, but when I gave them to the other woman, the ward staff went bonkers at me, saying, you can't bring food for other people. Which I think Val thought was quite funny, that we'd tried it, but it didn't work. So she was always looking at what the systems were. She was very interested in what went on. So for a while, she made some friends. She was really kind to quite a lot of people. And the people who were more vulnerable than her, I would say, at that point, who didn't have visitors, for example, she really worked a lot with them and got them to play Scrabble. And then once when she was playing Scrabble, I noticed that she was letting them win, sort of, she was like trying to build them up, doing little nice things.
In fact, and I'm just moving on now to paragraph 47 of your statement, when you come to dealing with some of the later events in summer 2015, and I'm talking now when she was assessed in the August, but not accepted, in fact, for a place on a rehabilitation and recovery ward. Do you remember it in Ipswich Road? One of the things that was particularly noted, and partly why she didn't perhaps get the place, but we'll come to it in a moment, is that Val herself acknowledged that the ward had helped her manage her health, mental health, and reported some mood stability. That came out later on. And that it was noted that whilst she had a past history of suicidal ideation and emotional dysregulation, at that stage, which is I think the period you're talking about, she was denying current risk and said that, it was noted that she was engaging in community leave and social activities such that they considered her mental state was stable, cooperative and forward-looking. Was that a feature of that particular period, would you say?
It definitely was. I mean, the lithium did have a big effect, because when she took the lithium, she started getting hand tremors and couldn't write anymore. And the fact that she lost some of her personality through not being able to do things did make it worse for her.
Can I ask you about the lithium? Because we've heard from your early evidence that she declined to take that in the October when you saw Dr. C. When did she start on lithium, to your knowledge?
Straight after that. Straight after she said no, they put her on it. But we didn't know this till we saw the notes. So a lot of the medication, we had no idea what she was being given until we got the medical notes after she died.
On the 1st of April 2015, so we certainly know it's before then, she went and had another assessment with Dr. A. This is your paragraph 43, where there's reference to her feeling anxious, to the fact that the venlafaxine was making her feel anxious at that stage, And as you say, the lithium was causing her to tremor and making it difficult to write. She'd been doing a writing activity, I think, hadn't she, prior to that? So that was affecting that. Is that right?
Yeah.
And you know from the 1st of April assessment that the plan was that the ward manager was going to refer Val to the psychosis pathway. Just dealing with the medication again, I think it's quite clear, you've said on several occasions in your statement, you take the view, your view is that she wouldn't have crashed the car if she hadn't been on the medication. I think the venlafaxine and the zopiclone at that stage. Yeah. And you consider, as her daughter, that the medication was exacerbating her feelings of anxiety.
Yeah, obviously I've known her all my life, and she had been on medication while I'd known her, but my mum was really anti-drugs. She hardly ever took like a paracetamol or anything. Very against recreational drugs. Didn't drink alcohol apart from a little bit at Christmas. So she wasn't someone, she was someone that drugs were going to have a massive impact on. So I could see that she was not herself. So that summer before she crashed the car, when she was in a terrible state, we'd been on holiday. She couldn't function. She couldn't function at all. And she wasn't sleeping, which obviously is awful for anyone. And so the zopiclone and the venlafaxine together was clearly having an impact on her. And it was only after the crash that she told me that every morning she would have suicide ideation, and she had to get past like 11 o'clock in the morning and then it would subside. But it had been happening for some time, that she just had this weird reaction. And when you read the side effects on most drugs, but especially, ironically, the ones that are for lack of sleep or depression, one side effect is suicide ideation. And the suicide ideation is just 2 words, isn't it? But it's massively means you're planning a way to kill yourself. And that was what she was doing. And obviously, crashing your car into a lorry, not a great way to kill yourself for so many reasons. And so I know Val well enough that had that not been kind of drug-induced suicide ideation, she would have had a plan that she would have done it at home, and she would have worked it all out, that the dogs were okay. You know, she would have worked something out. And we talked about suicide over the years. We talked about everything. And it had never been that she would just do something like jump off a cliff. We went to Beachy Head together, and we were talking about Beachy Head as kind of a place that people went. And it was like, no, it's just that doing something that's going to create mayhem for loads of other people just wasn't something that she'd ever talked about. And it just, I just know instinctively that crash, because I saw her hours after it happened, and she was just, I know she had more medication then because of the pain relief, but she just was talking absolute nonsense, and I'd never seen her like that before. And she'd got in her head that I had come, because I was in town at that time, she'd got in her head that I was coming to give her a car or do something like that she didn't want me to do. So, yeah, she was just going round and round. She was just spinning with all the medication, and probably having had the counselling the day before had not kind of helped her.
One of the features of your statement is, and you say it a number of times, as you've said, your concerns about the medication and what you describe as over-prescribing. But in particular, you say that you felt no one listened to you as regards her medication.
I mean, they literally looked at me like I was some kind of, I don't know. Right from the start, because when she was in Cambridge, she was being heavily medicated for the physical injuries. And I talked to the team then and said, isn't this a good time to get her off the venlafaxine and the zopiclone, which she believes made her crash the car? You need to get her off these. And they were like, oh, no, we can't just take her off them. I mean, she was having all kinds of other medication and operations and anaesthetics and everything. She had a skin graft for the burns. She was in agony, of physical agony. So they just said, no, we're just going to leave the medication as it is. And then, I don't know if you were about to come to this anyway, but she wrote a statement. She wrote down that she did not want ever to have venlafaxine again, and signed that and said that she wanted any medication changes to come through us, the children. And that document that we did see, which I'm not very good at keeping records myself, I don't think I had a copy of it, but that was in her records, didn't turn up in the records. So when we got all the records, that wasn't there.
So you're right, that's exactly what I was going to come on to, because one of the concerns you've raised, which we outlined at the outset of your evidence, is this concern about the lack of involvement of not only of Val, but of you and your siblings in decision-making. And I was going to ask you, because at paragraph 44, you say, or you go on to say, that you and Val all felt out of discussions, and I'm talking more generally here, not just about medication, and you say that she had made absolutely clear, by way of written document, that she wanted you to be involved, but yet you feel that you were shut out of discussions, not just about medication, but more generally.
Yeah, everything. I mean, the medication thing, without telling us, mind your own business, we're the experts, that is kind of what they did. They not only ignored the fact that we said no venlafaxine in any circumstances, they carried on doing it. The lithium, same thing. Why was she given lithium if she wasn't bipolar? What was the reason? I can't see any reason at all why she was given it, and that caused a hand tremor. And just to point out, we didn't know that they'd put her back on venlafaxine, and we wouldn't have known until we got the medical records, and especially the toxicologist's records.
I was going to ask you, so you discovered that after she died?
Yeah.
Just again, in terms of communication with you and your brother and sister, you say it had been recorded that you were all to be, that they should discuss her care and treatment with all of you. Is that right?
Yeah, with all of us, or any one or two of us.
Well, I was going to ask
we didn't all have to be there, but not one of us ever got talked to about any of it.
I was going to ask, you may not be able to help us, whether it was one of you in particular that was listed, for example, as her nearest relative or next of kin.
Well, I think I was the person who was the kind of named person for the medical issues.
Right.
My sister, Nicola, was the one who's there for the kind of immediate emergency because she lived nearby. One of the brothers lived in Norwich, so was quite far away. The other brother's lovely, bit of a hippie, not that much use. So he was there for like visiting, brilliant visiting, but not to take on the responsibility stuff.
And you'd make a reference in your statement to how much you think they could have got from you had they spoken to you, had you been more involved. You use the phrase lost invitations. What do you mean by that?
So there was at one point, because obviously I'm at work, I was working full time I think then, and I kept thinking, why have we not been called to any reviews or anything? So I think I rang up and was like, we haven't had anything for ages. What's happening? It must be coming up to Val's like quarterly review or whatever, and we don't want it just to be sprung on us that she's suddenly leaving. What's happening? And it was like, oh yeah, we sent you an invitation. And I'm like, where did you send the invitation? And then it was like, no one really seemed to know where it was or when it was. So I found one strain of things that they'd never actually sent, that never came to me. That was when I found out, I think, that there was this big meeting on July 15th. And it was like, I was like, well, that's like, in 2 days' time, I've got to get permission to be away from work, which I did get. But so it was like that we either wouldn't get told anything. There were quite a lot of things that Val went to on her own. And then I was like, why didn't we get invited to come to that particular meeting? And it was just like, oh, we had her there, we just sort of did it. So there were a lot of those things that happened. Or it might be that maybe one of the psychiatrists was doing a kind of a weekly round, but then a lot more would come out of that than you would expect. The medication might change or something else. A decision would be made there and then without us getting told it, because we just thought it was the weekly round or the daily round, whatever that they did.
And you, of course, weren't involved in
No, we
those.
didn't know that was happening.
Can I ask you then about that meeting on the 15th of July, which, as you've already told us, was, I think you say, sprung on you, or you'd got very short notice. You call it, I think, at a number of places in your statement, Val's annual review. It was the care programme approach meeting, is that right?
Yes.
And at paragraph 49, to put no finer point on it, you say that meeting has scarred you for life. Can I ask you about it?
Yeah, it's okay, carry on.
You were at that meeting.
I was.
Was any other member of the family there?
No, just me and Val.
And I think you describe about 15 healthcare
I think
professionals.
there were about 15, between 12 and 15 NHS people there.
We've already touched upon one of the outcomes of that review meeting. I'm going to come back to the review meeting, which was this decision that Val should be assessed for a rehabilitation and recovery place, to use shorthand, at Ipswich Road. It was, as you've already touched upon, that she wasn't accepted there because her mental state was considered to be stable, cooperative and forward-looking.
I mean, I can't really accept that because I know 100% from that meeting that she wasn't accepted there because it wasn't an option. So it isn't that there was something about her state. They just kept saying different things. So within the actual meeting...
In fact, I think you say in your statement, and I'm going to come on to the meeting, I promise in a moment, at paragraph 48, you say when you went to the facility, you noted that the people in it were of a different age.
Well, there were like 17-year-olds in there. I mean, it wasn't an option. And actually, in the meeting, Dr. A, he was sort of murmuring about this placement, but there was one member of the team who was linked to, like, where different rehabilitation type places. And she was saying really adamantly, it's not an option. Ipswich Road isn't an option. And I remember just thinking, wow, they're arguing in front of me. And then a couple of other people piped up about why it wasn't an option. Val's sitting there and they're talking about where to put her and they're arguing about this place. So it wasn't an option. And I think it was just for me, it was, let's pretend we're looking at places for Val to go. Remember, at the same time, she was looking for a council property or another place that she could live that wasn't her own house. So she wasn't just leaving it to them. She was actively, with our help, trying to find somewhere else to live in case they suddenly just put her back out of the thing. So Ipswich Road was not an option. It was never going to be an option.
Can I just ask you, just pick up on what you said about them arguing in front of you, in front of Val? I think you say in your statement, some staff were saying she had to leave the ward. Dr. A was saying he wouldn't ask her to leave the ward. Others were saying she couldn't stay. And this discussion that you've described, what effect did that discussion, did that argument, as you've described it, have on Val?
She was just very nervous. She was shaking through most of it. She was like a little mouse. She was like a different person to the person we grew up with. She was just terrified, and all she was thinking, she was just waiting for them to say the words, "You're going to have to go home," which is when I said to the doctor, Val's terrified. She has said if she goes home, she will kill herself. And she said it there. They asked her, and she said, yeah, I will kill myself.
She said it in the meeting itself.
I will kill myself if I have to go home. And that's when he said, rest assured, she won't leave until she's well enough to leave. Which, of course, is ambiguous, because who's going to say that she's well enough? You only need one of those people that wanted her out to say she's well enough. So then...
Dr. A.
Dr. A. And then the other doctor wasn't in there at that point. It was just him. And then I was really worried that Val might... she was talking about getting a car at this point, and I was really worried that she was going to get a car and either just have an accident because she wouldn't be able to drive because she had so many drugs in her, or that she would try and crash a car again. And I asked him directly, is she allowed to drive? And he said yes. And I remember being really shocked that he would say yes. My mum really told me off as soon as we got out. She told me off for saying it. And then she said he could have, written a letter. And then when we got the medical notes, that was changed, that he'd said no. But he 100% said yeah, because I was desperate. And obviously I looked it up, and I know that she wouldn't have been legally allowed to drive at that point. So that was what the meeting was. It was just going round and round in circles. And at the end, he absolutely assured us that she wouldn't leave until she was safe to leave.
You say in your statement where you deal with this, about the 15 of them there, you say none of them had any sympathy. And then you say this, they were not joining up the dots of the care of this vulnerable elder. What do you mean by that?
Well, it was just like there were 15 different people in the room. At one point, one guy said he had to go and move his car, as if that was more important than being in Val's annual review. They were just it just felt like there were quite random people in there, but actually they had quite a lot of responsibility for her care. So they think there were some of the care in the community type people there, but they just weren't connecting with each other. So the big picture, it didn't seem to be a holistic approach. This person is still suicidal all this time after trying to crash a car. What are we going to do as a team to make sure that she does not kill herself?
Later on in your statement, at paragraph 125, when you return to this, you say it was confusing to Val and her family as who was actually in charge. Would that be a fair...
Well, yeah, because Dr. A definitely acted as if he had full control, trying to give us this assurance. But other people were shaking their heads, visibly shaking their heads, like as if to say, no, you can't say that. While he was speaking it, Val was kind of reassured that would mean she could be there longer. I just wanted to go straight to the CEO and say, what is going on? So it just felt like this is not a team that are working together. They don't have a plan. And at any moment, if he wasn't there, which is kind of what happened because he went on holiday, other members are going to do what they want to do to try and get Val out at the same time.
So just considerable uncertainty.
Massive uncertainty, yeah.
Just something slightly different, and then I'm very mindful of the time, Chair, but just deal with this because there has to be a break, as you know, I think, Sophia, after about no longer than 90 minutes. What you've described in some of these events and what you've referred to in your statement is a kind of, you've talked about lack of sympathy, lack of compassion, lack of empathy. I think empathy is my word. And I think you've, as we say at the beginning of your evidence, you've noted that some of the behaviour you consider impacted on the dignity of the inpatients on the ward. Can I just ask you about a particular example within your statement? And that's this board. There was a board, a whiteboard or a notice board that was next to the notice board. You deal with it at paragraph 45, and you say this really struck you as to the ward. Well, those are my words, but this is something you...
Yeah, so I saw it. It was so when you walked in to the ward, on the left as you walked in, there was an office, and the office had a door, but it had like glass in the door, so you could see into the office. But that's where, when Val was first admitted, we'd go in and talk about how she was to people. And I did notice this big whiteboard was in there, but Val was really upset about it because it had the name of the patient and what they'd done to try and kill themselves, like the manner of suicide attempt. So it was written on there.
So in full display?
Yeah, just as you walked in the office, it was there, which if you looked through the window, you could see it. And that office, so work people would, like if they had deliveries, you might get someone go in there. It was not just, it wasn't like fully private. It wasn't all private, because if we went in, other people were going in there as well. So Val did really complain about it, and they'd stopped it. eventually.
I think you explain in your statement how Val advocated for the other patients.
Yeah.
And the lack of privacy and dignity that board revealed.
Yeah, she would advocate for, whatever, if people weren't getting the right food, or so some of them might have dietary needs. She would talk to them about that. She wasn't shy about going to the office and saying, this hasn't happened, you need to look after them. So, yeah.
Chair, it's not quite 90 minutes, but would that be a convenient moment before we moved on to the October? And we'll take a short break now.
10 minutes?
Yes, 10 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Sophia, I want to ask you a little bit about discharge planning, such as it was. You explain in your statement, and for the record, this is paragraph 231, that around, and I think this is the paragraph that says August 2014 when it should say August 2015.
Right.
Is that right? Shall I just put that on the record?
Okay.
I think we identified that earlier. But you explained that around August 2015, conversations increasingly focused on Val's discharge. And it was claimed, it would appear incorrectly, looking at your paragraph 232 and some of the other evidence that you refer to, that the local commissioning group were pushing for Val's discharge.
Yeah. When you say it appears, you mean from
As in,
the note?
no, that it was claimed that that's what was happening, and it appears that was an incorrect claim.
Yeah, so I think, like Val, she was a bit worried about me at this point. I think that I was getting really frustrated. I think she was trying to not have me go to the CEO. My brother, Pablo, the younger brother, had already, right at the very beginning of this process, written to the Minister for Health and the Care Quality Commission.
And I think the CEO at the time too.
And the CEO. So we'd already written about what we thought was a really bad approach to my mum's care. And she was always worried that things like that would mean they'd be meaner to her. And so I think she kind of stopped telling us things. So there was a little suggestion that she didn't like 2 of the members of staff and that they were horrible to her, but she wasn't telling us the real specifics. And so it wasn't again until when she was found that there was a note beside her.
No,
Am I jumping too far ahead?
No, you are, but please, I'm not going to stop
What
you.
did you ask me again? Sorry.
I was just talking about her discharge, and it would appear, as you think you've made clear, it's something you've learnt since.
But that's the only way that I found out.
That it was being
so
suggested.
No one had said anything to us there because they'd basically stopped talking to us. We didn't get anything from them. So no one had said anything. We were just constantly on edge. When are they going to kick her out, basically?
So let me take it in stages then, if I may. It's perhaps my fault, and let's do it in this way. We've already identified that one of your main concerns throughout is the lack of involvement, not only of you, but of Val herself in decision-making around her care.
Can I just point out that it is written into their policy, and it was at the time, that they had to involve us at every stage.
Absolutely, and I think in your statement you reference some evidence that the inquiry heard in May about that from the experts that were called. But just coming back to that, you say, I think at your paragraph 234, that Val was told of what was happening. I think this is the way you've described it. Val was told of what was happening in her care, but not meaningfully involved as far as you were concerned.
No, so she did start talking to us about they're going to kick me out, and now they've told the commissioners, and we were like, why would they do that? That's nothing to do with that. So she was starting to speak like that. We thought she was worried, but they were obviously saying that to her as well.
And I think you also point out, and we've already been through, or you've given evidence about your experience when she was discharged the year before. At your paragraph 234 and 235, you say the thought of Val's discharge was terrifying, I think is the word you use, owing to the absence of what you considered to be a clear plan for that discharge. Have I summarised that correctly?
Yes.
And you refer to the fact that you hadn't been involved, you'd had very little contact with the care coordinator, that no discharge date had been communicated, and there'd been no real planning involving you as far as you could see or you were concerned.
Not for us, no, not that we would know of.
And at paragraph 237, you say as follows, and can I remind you of it? I hope you don't mind. You say, I have serious and significant concerns about the discharge decision process and communication. In 2015, it was even worse than 2014. There was no engagement with the family by the care coordinator, and Val's housing situation was ignored. She couldn't return to her house as it was a major trigger, yet the team resisted her move to council housing, even telling her she didn't have the right to access it. You say that the council, by contrast, was supportive. The hospital's approach was cold and lacking in empathy and focused on moving her out without considering her needs. They said unkind and dismissive things, missing the critical fact that her home environment was traumatising her. And then you go on to say at your paragraph 300, Val couldn't live with us or with herself. She needed properly a safe place away from the family to be looked after by professionals who really wanted her to stay alive. She needed to be valued for who she was, with her depression and her occasional happiness just being part of that. Val needed to be heard and believed when she said suicide was her only option if she was not allowed to stay in hospital. One day she may well have been well enough to leave, but not on October the 9th, 2015, which any kind person could have seen. Now, can I ask you about that? October the 9th, we know, was not in fact discharge but leave, but she was let out. And we'll come back to that, I promise. Can I ask you about your views as a family? As a family, what did you want or what did you think should or could happen to Val to allow her to leave the ward? Because we have a situation that you've described where she was doing well, I think in the summer months, and then the conversation would move to discharge and she would become anxious and unwell again with the thought of it. As a family, what did you hope or want or think should or could happen?
I mean, that is a really hard question because you've got the kind of level that's like a dream that she could come and live with one of us and it would all be really cute and nice. And then you've got that, you have to then think about that reality. Could she have lived? We all had quite young children at the time, or, children that would have found it very hard. And we were terrified that if she lived with one of us, she might kill herself in our houses because you couldn't be sure that we could look after her and be safe. So we felt like we couldn't look after her or give her what she needed to be safe. So you kind of have that guilt of that's the ideal is that the families live together and work together. Obviously, I was working really hard with her to try and find her a place to live, which again was, we just sort of felt like we kept getting kicked in the teeth by the hospital because the woman who was supposed to be helping her do this actually said, you did just say it, but I just want to say it more clearly, she actually said to her, and it was in the notes, that she didn't have a right to a council house because she had her own house. Which again, why would you say that to someone who's suicidal? So that was kind of how she was feeling, that her rights were diminishing, but the council were really sweet and other people were. So we did have a bit of a dream that she would find a place that would work. And the alms house that my dad lives in, I wrote a really strong letter to them, begging basically, and they did offer her a place, actually, which was amazing. But we were still worried that if she took that, she might kill herself there where my dad was, which would not be very nice. And also the place they offered her had stairs, which she was a bit worried about because she was quite disabled from the car accident. But also the window looked at her old house. So it was literally a few hundred feet along the road. So it wasn't ideal. But there were people who were working really hard to try and find her a place. So even after she died, someone from another housing unit, she called me actually to say, I'm really sorry. Anyway, she'd found a place for my mum, but like too late. And again, that might have worked because it was bang smack in the middle of town, and that might have been a big enough change for Val that it would have been bearable. But anyway, that didn't happen either.
You said that the council, by contrast, was supportive.
The council were fantastic.
What do you mean by that?
So Colchester Borough Council, they put her on the list for a council accommodation, even though she had her own home, because they listened to us that she couldn't live there for so many reasons, and also when they did offer her somewhere, because they did offer her some not very suitable places, but when they offered her somewhere, we'd go and look at it, and if she said no, they didn't then start pressuring her to say, you've only got like one more place and you're off the list. They were just really patient and just kept telling us if somewhere came up, and then we'd go and look at it and try and weigh it up. Some of them were just no way. But I sort of thought maybe somewhere would come up that would suit her.
Okay. What we do know, sadly, is it never got to the stage where Val was discharged, and she remained an inpatient on the Heneage ward for almost exactly a year until the 9th of October 2015. You've already told us how she died at her home address, and you've already explained that she was on leave. She was on leave from the ward at the time. But we know from your statement, for the record, paragraph 215, that she wasn't escorted or accompanied on that leave, and that you nor any other member of your family had been told that she was going out on leave.
No.
And the first you were aware of that leave, on the 9th of October, was when your sister Nicola received a telephone call from the ward because Val hadn't gone back at the allotted time.
Yeah.
I think she was due back at 9, and your sister got a call, was it around 9:30ish or something of that nature?
About 27 minutes past.
And whilst you weren't aware of it at the time, we know this is something you found out later, what did you learn afterwards about how long that period of leave was for? How long was she going to be away for the ward for?
Well, 12 hours.
And
she wanted to go out at 9 and come back at 9, and obviously that's October. It was getting dark, it was a bit chilly.
Can I just ask, sorry to interrupt, how did that compare in length with her?
I'd never done it before. Even when she came, my older brother brought her to me one Christmas when she was ill from the ward. It must have been 2014. So she came for Christmas, and they wouldn't let her get back either really late or stay overnight, even though she was with us. So when she wanted to spend a Christmas in Sussex, they were really strict about what time she had to get back. But on this occasion, I know you're going to mention it, but she'd been on suicide watch basically just before it. Can I just go back to the housing thing? Because I just want to say that, otherwise I'll feel I didn't say it. I just want to point out that my mum, so I say she was on the council list and we were looking at houses, but that isn't, she wasn't looking at houses like, oh yeah, this is all right. She was literally shaking. When I looked at her, I'm like, I was just thinking it's ridiculous. How can Val be looking at housing? She can't do anything. She could not live on her own in a house. And so obviously that was compounding the guilt that I didn't feel like at that point I did say, do you want to come and live with us to try it? But then it was like, oh, I'm not sure. You know, I don't really want to leave everybody else because then I won't be near the other dog and everyone else. So it wasn't looking for a house. It was attempting to look at places and attempting to imagine surviving in one on her own. So we went to a few places that were sort of more communal, that she might be able to have other people around her, because that's obviously what she needed. But for one reason or another, they either weren't available or they weren't suitable. So, sorry, back to the 12 hours. She'd never been out for 12 hours. And as I said, even at Christmas, that wasn't like an option, really. I think they might have let her out just for 12 hours then. But with my brother, absolutely no other time would they have allowed it. And I just want to point out that the reason she gave them, the where she was going, she'd given them the same reason, like a day before or something. So if anyone had been, she was obviously testing them to see how carefully they were kind of watching what she was doing. So she used to go to this sort of like a friendship group thing, and she'd done it that week, but she said she was doing it again, and nobody ever questioned it or rang us up to say, oh, this is where she's going. Does that sound a bit odd? It was just, she just said, I'm going there. And it would not have taken 12 hours to do what she said she was doing. So that could have flagged up things. My sister...
She asked to go on leave?
Yeah, she just said, I'm going out, basically. Right. It wasn't like you had to make an application, even so close after being on observations. And my sister and I both used to ring her in the morning, and we both talked to her that morning, and she told us both that she was staying in the hospital all day.
Can I just take you back then to the few days before that, because I think you started touching on it. Again, for the record, it's paragraph 50 of your statement, and you've explained, we've already mentioned it as we've gone through, that on the 6th of October, Val was seen by the ward manager. There was a meeting with the ward manager. And there are 4 features, or 4 things I think we need to note about that meeting. Can I go through them with you? Firstly, and you deal with this in your paragraph 50, as I say, Val updated the ward manager about her plans, about trying to find accommodation and so on and so forth. That was the first thing. There was a discussion about that. The second thing that happened is the ward manager, which you've discovered since, obviously you didn't know this at the time, the ward manager indicated to Val that she had invited to one of the commissioners to the CPA meeting that was fixed for the 28th of October, as they had requested information around care plans. So she'd told Val that one of the commissioners was coming to a meeting. Is that right?
Not about the care plan, about discharge.
About discharge. And the third thing that we know from the notes is that on hearing that, Val became visibly anxious. She explained that that there were triggers for suicide that were still in her home. She expressed that at the meeting. Yeah. And the fourth thing we should note, which is what you've already made reference to, is that a result of this obvious anxiety and this expression of suicidal ideation, Val's observation levels were raised on the 6th of October from level 1 to level 2.
Yeah.
And just to underline what it was that how they were being raised, it was agreed that there would now be checks on Val around her safety and her suicidal ideation every 15 minutes on the 6th of October.
I can't remember the timing-wise, but it
was 4 times an hour.
No, I just mean because at the same time as that, or just after that, Val had been heard speaking on the phone or pretending to speak on the phone, saying, if they send me home, I'm going to kill myself. Yeah. So, and I think she'd actually said, I'm going to crash my car. She'd said something that was really obviously her particular way of trying to kill herself.
I will come on to that, I promise. Paragraph, but have I got those 4 things from the meeting right?
Yeah, but also the bit where the ward manager told her that the commissioner wanted to come to the meeting to see what was going on with her discharge. Val obviously knew that that was a really horrible thing to say, and she got her to write it down. So she wrote it down, and that was next to my mum when we found her dead.
At her home address?
She was like next to her.
She took it from the ward to her home address?
Yeah, she had it in her glasses case, and she had it next to her when she died.
You say at your paragraph 51, and I think you probably would say that underlines it, that we shouldn't underestimate the significance, the power of that incident and that conversation would have had on your mother. Is that right?
Yeah, totally.
You consider, it's your view, that that conversation was intended to scare Val into agreeing to discharge, in effect?
Yeah, everything. I mean, they almost had her bag packed by the door. I mean, every single thing was about her leaving. There was no communication that wasn't about her leaving.
Did you later, and you explain this at your paragraph 56, you say you later learned at the inquest into Val's death that the commissioners were not considering discharging Val. They didn't have the authority in that sense, but you consider that was the impression that was being conveyed.
Well, we knew that they wouldn't do that, which is when Val would talk about it, you know, like offhand. We're like, that isn't something, and do you want us to look into it? But we didn't know that this person had said this to her face and then written it down to make it feel real. And we didn't know that until we found the note next to her body, and we also read the records where the ward manager had indicated that she had raised all this stuff again at a time when Val was really distressed, and that Val had then got more distressed about it. But at the inquest...
I was going to ask you.
Because I didn't have a solicitor, I did the questioning, and I did ask about it, and directly...
The ward manager? You asked the ward manager?
I spoke to her, yeah, and I said, did you write that note? Because I've got it here. And she said, yes, I did. And then I said, and is that true? Can that happen? And she said, no, I should never have written that note.
She said she should never have written...
So she knows that she shouldn't have written the note, and she did say that in the inquest.
Now, that was followed by an assessment on the 7th. We'll come to the telephone call in a minute, with Dr. A. So the following day, Val had an assessment with Dr. A. And you have seen, and we'll come to the letter about it, that you know that at some point around this time, that ward staff reported that they'd overheard a conversation when Valerie was telling somebody about thoughts and plans to kill herself by crashing a car. So you've seen that from a later report. So on the 6th, she's put onto level 2s. She's been She's been viewing property without success. This is on the record. Sorry, this is in the records. It records that she's shown reluctance to be discharged. The commissioners' meeting had been planned. She had been stable on the ward, but there's a risk of suicide after discharge in community. This is in the records. This is your
in the medical records.
Yeah, paragraph 52. The records then go on to say, which you set out in 52, seen, as in she's been seen by Dr. A, reported frustration around finding property, but she is hopeful to find one, stated she will be able to cope after discharge without the support she's getting on the ward. But upon questioning, stated that she does feel hopeless about it to the point of contemplating suicide. Denied any thoughts of self-harm suicide whilst on the ward. Discussed medications. She's not keen on any increase in rates due to side effects. And the plan is written as number 1, reduce observations to level 1. Number 2, continue with current managements. And number 3, carrying on looking at property or for property. And at paragraph 58 of your statement, you explained, and I think these are your words, that you are perplexed and angry when you look at these together, because putting the 6th and 7th of October together, you consider that Val was begging not to be discharged home, as into her home address, that she was expressing clear signs of suicidal ideation, that she was distressed and she didn't feel she could be away from the ward, and that she was feeling pressure that the trust were about to discharge her, not least because she'd been there for a long time. That's your take, I think.
Yes.
Your interpretation of what happened on those 2 days. But again, you've said it, and just to underline, you were not aware, of any of that at that time.
No, nothing. I mean, we weren't aware that she had talked about suicide openly. We weren't aware that they were telling her that the commissioners were anxious for her to leave. We weren't aware of any of it, and we weren't aware that she'd been put on observations, even though she'd never been on observations before.
So you were not aware of the level 2 increase?
No, not in any way, nothing.
And you remain concerned, you say in your statement, about the decision then to reduce them the very next day?
Yeah, like how could that even happen? That 1 minute you're on 15-minute observations and then you're not. I just want to add that both of the doctors, the psychiatrists, had been on holiday at the same time, not together necessarily, but they'd been away for quite a lot of weeks. There'd been a slight overlap where one of them was there, but there'd been one time where there was somebody else who sort of stepped in and did something to do with my mum who she didn't really know. So it felt like kind of a little bit of like an empty space. There wasn't really anyone you could ask any questions of. And when we did see Val, she was coming outside to see us and getting us to drop her off outside. Now, obviously, in hindsight, that was probably part of her plan to keep us away from what was going on inside. But they didn't ask to see us either. Nobody ever kind of made contact with us. And also at that time, she was presenting to us as quite odd in terms of the kind of medication. And again, I only found out reading the reports that every time she saw us, they were giving her diazepam.
I was going to, yeah. That was for leave. They were giving her diazepam,
Every time
you say,
she came
in order
out,
to help her go out.
Yeah, they were giving her diazepam, which was like, wow. So, yeah, that felt really odd.
So can I ask you this? And you've mentioned this, and you deal with in your statement how there is really no communication, you say, over this period of time. So when did you first learn of Val's assertion, which seems to have taken place around the 6th or 7th, that she would kill herself once off the ward? When did you first learn about that?
Interesting. So there was obviously an anonymous letter
I'm going to come to that in a
that's
minute.
involved.
After Val's death, I take it.
There's an anonymous letter that came quite quickly after her death.
I think you could, should we move on to it now?
I think so. Well, it's just in terms of the Val saying outwardly, obviously the letter indicated that, but it was written in the notes. And I remember when my sister and I went through the notes and we kept gasping, oh my God, how did we not get told this? So, and that was also there in the notes. So that it had been written in the notes, but nobody else had told us that.
So, sorry, I said it was certainly after Val had died.
After she died, yeah.
You've talked about this anonymised letter. Let's deal with that, shall we now? It's at paragraph 64 of your statement. And I think we can summarise it in this way. You became aware of a letter from a whistleblower, an anonymous letter from somebody who said they were in and around the ward at the time. And the letter states that Val had told somebody that she was going to kill herself whilst on leave the next day, so that being the leave of the 9th.
She told someone on the phone.
And this is what you have at your 64,
Yeah.
that this had not been highlighted to the nurse in charge, and that thereafter the team, or the clinical team, had been told to keep that quiet.
Yeah, so the anonymous letter went not to us, but it went to the CEO at the time, went high up anyway. And then we were told about it by the trust initially, and then by the police.
And I think you would say, or you're concerned, that nothing has really been done properly about it, or as a result of that letter.
The letter?
Yeah.
I mean, the letter was just, we were like, finally, someone's going to speak up. We thought there was going to be like a proper whistleblowing thing, because it said very clearly that the ward manager told people not to get in touch with the family, to tell them that Val was openly talking about suicide, which figured in to us why we hadn't been told. So that felt like it was so real, and that we thought that was it. It was all going to come out. But then we found out from the police that they did investigate the letter, but they allowed the clinical manager to be in on all the interviews with the staff, which is also bonkers. And that they literally just said, did you send the letter? And they said, no. Or do you remember them saying this? So there was some sort of an investigation, but no one was compelled to answer.
And the clinical manager.
And there was the manager there.
All right. Can I just move you then on to the 9th of October? and ask you about Val's leave before that time. I think we can deal with it very quickly. At paragraph 210, you explain that she'd had several instances of leave. You've touched on it already this afternoon. Most of the time, she would be accompanied by one of her children. Yes? Although you consider there should have been a process whereby staff would ask who she was going to be with and verify that. That's something that you have reflected on and think should be part of the leave arrangements. You're nodding.
Yes.
Right, isn't
yeah.
it? And in your view now, you think that the handling of Val's leave requests overall was inconsistent, and you've seen the notes, you've seen the records to this effect, I think. And you've noted that sometimes they would go in so far as to include what she was wearing and details of what she was going to do, but mostly they were blank or vague as to the arrangements.
Yeah, there might just be a couple of words on there.
There was no involvement of the family in these leave decisions.
No, never.
Out. And you have already reiterated that you were not told that she had been granted leave on the 9th of October.
No.
You had not been told about the increased observations on the 6th. We already know that. And you certainly hadn't been told that it was going to be 12 hours and unaccompanied. Can I ask you this? If you had been made aware of the increased observations and the fact she'd asked for 12 hours unaccompanied leave, giving the same reason as she had shortly before, what would you have done?
Well, I think my sister would definitely have gone to the house.
Your sister, did you say?
My sister would have definitely gone to the house to see if there was a stash of tablets, because we probably could imagine that was what she might be thinking. We would have absolutely said, you have to you have to tell us everything that she's doing. So obviously we thought she was in order. Just as a sort of a by thing, I'd had quite a serious accident, a car accident, someone had hit my car. So I was a little bit preoccupied with dealing with trying to get another vehicle and sorting things out so I could go to Essex. So I didn't have a car either at that time. And my daughter had been a bit injured in the car crash. So that was all going on. And I think my mum realised I wasn't as kind of on it as usual. But so she was saying enough things to the people on the ward that had they been on it, they would have alerted us. We would have just watched every move, to be honest, and talked to her, tried to understand what it was, and then maybe even gone higher up in the hospital at that point to say all this pressure on her leaving is going to kill her, which I'd already said in the July the 15th meeting. I said that unequivocally. If you send her out, she will kill herself. So know this.
You've since seen the leave plan or the plan for this leave request. You deal with this at paragraph 217 of your statement. You give your view on it. It's poorly filled out. And the plan, can I just ask you about this? In terms of safeguarding Val, if at all, when she was on leave, there appears to have been some sort of plan to telephone Val while she was out that day. Can I just ask this, first of all? Did she have a mobile telephone? Did she use her mobile telephone a lot?
Yeah.
She was happy, she would use that a lot. And is that what you would speak to her on?
Yeah, always.
All right. As a plan, it failed from the outset, didn't it? Because the number was wrong, wasn't it? On the telephone number had been written down wrong.
Yeah, me and my sister saw the number and said it's not even the right number.
So no one was going to be able to get touch.
They couldn't contact her anyway.
So even putting that aside, I think you also say in your statement that what followed afterwards is a number of inconsistent accounts. I think there have been some suggestion that people tried to call her, or a voicemail has left, or a number of different versions, I think, about what happened.
Obviously, that just seemed like lies to us. Because some people said they called, some people said they didn't call. There was some sort of handover. They hadn't really talked about where she was. She went back by 9, but they didn't contact us till nearly 9:30. But the main thing is, why would you let someone out for 12 hours when they've never been out for 12 hours before, when they've just been on 15-minute observations?
Can I ask one thing? You say paragraph 213, Val deliberately told staff false information test whether they would check on it, and they didn't. What did you mean by that?
So I think that the week before that she killed herself, that she had been testing things, like telling them that she was going to the same place twice to see if they were going to question her. Just sort of seeing how far she could push, how long she was going to be out. So she'd never been to that friendship thing. She said she was, but she hadn't. So, you know, telling them that she was going there and that she'd be back by night. No, everything that she said could have been a little alarm bell. That's quite an odd thing. It was also an anniversary. Remember, it was the anniversary of when she was admitted. It was also the anniversary of her sister's death. Her sister didn't kill herself, but it was the anniversary of her sister's death. And it's my dad's birthday. So both of the suicide attempts were kind of a bit linked to my dad, weirdly. One was on his name's day, the car crash, the day after his name's day, and the suicide attempt was the day before his birthday. So she'd obviously, if they'd have been thinking about anniversary as a suicide trigger, they would have seen that that was quite a dangerous time for my mum.
Do you think she was capable at that stage of giving them a full sense of security about letting her out?
I mean, I find that hard to imagine that anyone would have any sense of security about letting her out anyway. So my bottom line is no, because how could they not look at her and see her as someone really vulnerable out on her own for 12 hours? And even though she said she was going to a group, it would have taken a couple of minutes just to ring me or my sister and double check where she was going to be. So I think Val probably was trying to do that. She was probably acting more cheery than she really was.
Thank you.
You've talked about Val going on leave before, and there'd been no prior incidents of her failing to return, for example. And you've already explained to us that you had no reason to think that she was on leave at all on the 9th of October because you and your sister had both spoken to her in the morning, and she'd actually told both of you she was staying on the ward that day.
Yeah, she didn't sound good. I mean, she didn't say she was staying in because she was having a nice time. It just felt like that was what she needed to do to stay safe.
We know then that, as you say, your sister got that telephone call, and as soon as you got it, you both feared the worst immediately, and that your sister then went to her house and found her there with her glasses case and the note that you've already described to us. Can I just ask you a little bit before we come to the end of your evidence, before we come to your recommendations or what you'd like to see change? We'll come to that in a moment, but can I just ask you a little bit about what happened after your mum died? We know from your paragraph 266 that you were the one that had to call the hospital. You had to tell them that she had died. And that after that, there was no outreach, you say. You had no contact from the hospital at all for about a week.
Yeah, eventually someone did ring, but it took quite a long time.
I'm looking just momentarily at your paragraph 267, just again for the record. Did you receive any support at all from the hospital, or offer of support from the hospital or the trust?
No, I don't think, I don't remember any. I think my sister was probably called in to collect my mum's belongings. So she would have gone into the hospital at some point to collect Val's stuff. And at that point, I think someone tried to say something to her, but by that time we were so fed up with that.
How long after do you think she went to get your mum's stuff?
It probably was about a week.
About a week. At that time, in 2015, were you allocated a family liaison officer or anything like that?
I remember one call where someone said something like, you know, there are people here you can talk to, but that's all I remember.
Did anyone make contact with you to offer any sympathy or anything of that nature?
Again, I think that in one of the conversations there was like we're sorry that it happened, but very guarded.
At your paragraph 269, in fact, you make reference to particular, I'm just going to make sure I get it right, you make particular individuals, I think the ward manager and the clinical manager, being dismissive and defensive in your view.
Yeah, I mean, I I seem to remember that at one point I rang and said, "What is wrong with you all? You've done nothing. You haven't even spoken to us. You don't seem to care at all." And they were trying to say that they did. And there might have even been a letter or something that they sent after that was like pretty insincere. But I felt that they had spent the time talking to each other about how they were going to deal with the fact that she'd committed suicide off the ward. But no, nothing real.
And you've already touched on the fact that there was a huge delay, I think you said, in providing the records to you. When
Months,
you asked for them.
absolutely months.
And that meetings were cancelled.
Horrific.
And it's fair to say, if we look at 289, you say one of the most distressing aspects was the later inquest and the behaviour of those from the trust at the inquest.
Well, I mean, they were openly lying about how much. I mean, they'd made speeches. It's almost like they'd practiced a little speech about how much they liked Val. And these were the people who hadn't done the records. And then they'd come up with these little speeches, and then they looked really pleased with themselves that they'd said it. That was quite hard. Obviously, the ward manager, she didn't just say, "I shouldn't have written the letter." It took a lot of questioning to get her to that point. And then at one point, when they left the inquest, we were obviously really upset, and my whole family were there, they were really laughing. We could hear them laughing in the room next door, and we were like, wow, that's quite interesting. That it felt that unpleasant, really.
There was a serious incident report. There was an investigation dated the 1st of February 2016. And I'm just going to put this shortly. You say in your statement you had no faith in the conclusions of that report.
Well, no, the SIR report, I think it got written and we raised loads of concerns, and everything to do with it was shambolic and horrible and so stressful. And then we noticed at the end that the clinical manager had quite a lot. She'd edited it and reviewed it before it came to us. So, and considering we were complaining about her, so we obviously really kicked off, and then that report was investigated by an independent group called Veritas.
I was going to come on to that. So Veritas were commissioned to undertake a quality assurance of it, and that's dated July 2016, and it was critical of the SIR. And you deal with some of their findings at paragraph 278 onwards. You say that their findings included there'd been unclear documentation of Val's leave plan on the 9th of October and inconsistent communication amongst the staff regarding her observation level, that NEPT should reinforce staff adherence to the inpatient leave policy, ensuring that all plans include thorough care planning and risk assessments. And they also included that NEPT should improve communication protocols around changes in observation levels to avoid misinterpretation, and that NEPT should share the coroner's findings with the care team and implement any required actions to implement clear version control system for investigation reports to ensure final documents are properly identified and filed. You've already made reference to the inquest, which took place in September 2016, I think, is that right? And you summarise the coroner's conclusion in your statement. This is at paragraph 145. And the conclusion was that Val took her own life while under a mental health diagnosis. That's how you've summarised it in your statement.
That's what they wrote on the inquest
on the
report.
record of inquest, yes. In your statement, you also refer to a much later meeting with EPUT, which we spoke about right at the beginning of your evidence, which was on the 13th of February 2018. And you describe it in your statement as the most shocking meeting to date. You remember which one I mean. And you said that, this is at 145, during this meeting, I was told categorically that Val was not depressed or mentally ill when she took her own life, and that staff confirmed this. And this was after the coroner ruled that Val had taken her own life while under a mental health diagnosis. At the end of the recording, they say Val was let out of hospital because depression comes and goes, and at the time, Val was not depressed. You give your view of this at 146, and you say that you think it was an attempt by EPUT, as they then were, to cover their backs, to justify how a person expressing suicidal ideation and intent on one day could then be let out for extended leave without family being notified.
Yeah.
Have I summarised that
Yeah,
accurately?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was, to me, that was like, okay, and 'cause I recorded that meeting. So it felt like, oh, that's it. It's all blown. They're going to be exposed for what they are because they're still lying about it now to try and cover their backs. But, of course, it's really hard to get anyone to take any notice or do anything about it.
I'd like to finish your evidence or your questions just by looking at what you've called in your statement your recommendations for change, what you would like to see happen in the future to improve the mental health services and care provided. I'm going to do it by reference to your statement, but you tell me if I've got this right. At paragraph 304, can I summarise? You make an overall observation that more can be done to care for people both as inpatients and in the community. And you're concerned about an attitude that you say is expressed by many that you simply can't stop some people committing suicide. That's something that concerns you. At paragraph 305, your words are, the drug culture of mental health care must change. We've touched upon this, and you remain of the view that Val was adversely affected by her medication regime and that there was no one listening to your concerns and that you consider there were issues of over-medication. Can I ask about that? What is it that you'd like to see? Is it clearer medication strategies, clearer communication? What is
Well, I think from the very start that doctors shouldn't just give any antidepressants to anyone. They've got to think about what might work for that person, whether it is an antidepressant or something else. I think there's got to be obviously a lot more to do with alternative therapies, talking and other things. But also the whole culture of just piling on the drugs. So unusually, I rang the toxicologist to ask to talk to them. And he said to me that really and honestly, older people should not be taking drugs long term because you can't expel them. There's nowhere for them to go. And that anyone really builds up either a tolerance and so they stop working or an intolerance that then does other things to you. And he said he was shocked at how many different types of drugs my mum had been given. And these weren't the ones, he could identify the ones that she took to kill herself, but they weren't the ones that he was talking about. He was talking about all the other ones that she was on, diazepam, back on venlafaxine. That's when I properly realised how much venlafaxine they'd been given her again, against our wishes.
Your next recommendation, I think have just already mentioned, because it follows on, which is you think that alternatives to drugs, such as talking therapies, acupuncture, these are some examples you list, natural remedies and distracting activities, as well as programs such as voluntary work to help people feel useful and needed, could save a lot of lives. You'd like to see, I think, emphasis on other therapies, on non-medication.
Yeah, there's no reason why there can't be more of that, because it's probably just as cost-effective, actually, than the massive amount that people are getting charged for drugs. And in the long run, you're not going to have to deal with all of these things so much. If people are actually helped not to commit suicide, and the way to help people to not commit suicide is to talk to them. That the whole thing is to talk to them, to be kind, to give them purpose. So when Val was first in the ward and she was helping other people, she forgot a little bit, not altogether, but she wasn't obsessing about what happened and how she felt. She was looking after other people and helping. So there are so many ways that it could happen. It's just that society doesn't seem to want it to happen or isn't putting something in place for it to happen.
Paragraph 299, I think just to pick up on what you said, you say, with real sustained talking therapy and therapeutic activities, Val could have lived to old age with dignity and some contentment.
Because the other thing that I don't think we've mentioned today is that in that weird summer, the last summer of her life, not only were the psychiatrists on holiday, but the psychologist had been told to end the talking therapy. So the talking therapies had just been stopped. And at the same time, a lot of the activities that had gone on, they also stopped. So it became a ward where people were just sort of wandering around a bit aimlessly, and there was no talking therapy.
At 307, you say there needs to be no economic pressure on trusts to remove patients to their homes if they're suicidal. Also, you say you'd like some explicit recognition of the need to demonstrate the same level of cares and safeguarding to voluntary patients as involuntary patients.
Yeah, so one of the things when I was doing research, I came across a case of Rabone that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And that was a young woman, same as my mum, who was a voluntary patient, and they had let her out for leave without telling the parents, without question. And she had committed suicide in a public place. And the parents really fought this to say that they should be given the same kind of safeguarding. And when I raised this in the inquest and other places, the consensus seemed to be, oh no, because they're voluntary patients, they can just come and go. And that is 100% what they thought on the ward. I mean, remember, Val was bringing in knives and tins and all kinds of dangerous things because they just treated her like someone who was just coming and going and quite independent. Whether that's because they didn't want to do all the paperwork that goes with it, I'm not sure. But I don't feel that she was afforded the same checks. And certainly the leave plans, not just on the day that she died, but that whole week, because the whole week of leave plans were really shocking and missing, some of them. That shows that she was just allowed to walk out the door.
At 308, you say, picking up on that leave plan point, this is your next one, leave plans, care plans, reviews, etc. should be fully standardised and digital with no possibility of falsification. Failure to fill these in should be seen as a serious employment misdemeanour. Those are your words. And you go on again, you've already said this, voluntary and section patients to be treated equally. And just before you answer, as a base for that, I'm just looking at some of the previous paragraphs in your report, because at 139, you say you don't feel the staff on the ward were trained properly about the completion of plans, including care plans, that you have noted through looking through the medical records that there were big gaps in the leave plans, particularly on the days surrounding her death. You consider that Val was hardly involved in plans. And then, of course, you go on to deal with the fact, as you already have, that you attended some meetings, but you feel there was little scope for meaning involvement from the family. So those are some of the points you've made, I think, which lead you to this this you feel proposed recommendation around leave plans and care plans.
I mean, from my point of view, and obviously I'm a teacher, so we have to be really careful about duty of care as well. If we thought that a young person in our care was in any way in danger or could harm themselves or anyone else, we'd know that we would be sacked if we didn't follow that through. You know, there are protocols that you have to do for safeguarding that they are embedded in your job. You wouldn't do the job if you weren't prepared to do that. And so I still don't understand why these scrappy little handwritten notes are allowed. I can't understand why in this day and age it's allowed. Because you can always back up or print things off if that helps, to have a paper copy. But the fact that things could be changed later, anyone could add something, change it. The fact that things were missing, there were definitely leave plans that had been taken out or lost that we couldn't find, and that you could do something digital, and the digital thing would record it. And even better, the loved ones could see it, because why would you want to keep it secret where people are and what's going on, if you have the permission of the patient, obviously.
That, I think, brings us on to, in fact, I'm going to skip one because it brings us on to your proposed recommendation at paragraph 310, which is families should have online access to records with the agreement of the patient so they can monitor the care of their loved ones.
Yeah, and with no pressure on them not to do that, because what we kind of started feeling...
You mean no pressure on the family not to do it?
No, on the patient, Especially when I was trying to stop the venlafaxine being given to her, because remember, she was on it again at the end, so very likely that it had another impact on her. But so when I was trying to say, Val really doesn't want to be on the venlafaxine, and we know that it's a danger to her, what I sensed, and from some of the things that Val said, is they were also talking to her saying, no, you need to be on it. So there needs to be a culture that's not them trying to persuade the patient to do what they want them to do. That there was a little clash going on there, and I think that's really strong, that they are saying, you need to be on the medication. We know because we're the experts. Your daughter's just worried about you. So I think that there's a danger there, and if we saw the records, we could see, oh, they've given a venlafaxine again, they haven't told us. We're going to have to sort this out, have the conversation. Maybe it's because they don't want those conversations. They're not willing to have the conversation with people.
I think that probably takes us back to the one I skipped over, which is your last proposal, which is at your 309, which is that liaison at every level, you say, should happen with patients and families unless there is a safeguarding reason why this can't happen. Because I think you say you remain extremely concerned, using the ward manager as an example, that such particular, you say, and significant information about your mother's position could be kept from you.
I mean, I just don't understand it. I don't understand how it can happen. I know the police in Essex did try looking into a clinical negligence case because there's so many deaths. I can't understand how, in this day and age, if someone is doing their job so badly and so dangerously and keeping information from the families when the policy states that they have to liaise with the family at every level. I don't understand how then they keep their jobs or get promoted, but that is what happens.
You say, and this is my last question, at your 292, and you say it's what still really upsets you, is that so few people really and honestly, you think, tried to help your mother even when she plucked up enough courage to ask. You say if it was their job to help her and they didn't, society itself should feel ashamed of letting that happen, and that no one who lacks compassion for the mentally unwell should work in that field.
I mean, we know that people work in fields that they're not really suited for. Some people, you know, it could be any job that could happen in, but this is about life and death. You know, if you're doing a job and you're not really suited to it, but you kind of get through the day. But if it's someone's life in your hands, and these are people who have openly said so many times, I want to kill myself, I don't understand why everything's not about trying to keep them alive and helping them to find a reason to stay alive and not making them feel that they're a burden. So 100% what was happening to Val, we knew this and we were trying to kind of alleviate it, but 100%, as we saw in the records, finally, she was being made to feel that she had to leave, and that her saying that she would kill herself when she went home really wasn't their concern.
Sophia, thank you. Those are all the questions that I want to ask. I'm just going to check in a moment whether the chair has any questions, and then there will be a short break, I think, as you know, to see if there are any other matters arising. If there are, then we will return. But if there are not, and in case we don't return, I'm going to turn to the chair to see if she has any other questions first.
No, I've got no further questions, but I want to thank you very much for coming today and for giving us your time and your thoughts. Thank you.
And again, I also say thank you for coming to give your evidence to honour Val, but just in case you don't come back, can I ask now that the photographs that you have provided of Val be put up now?
I think that's seaweed.
Oh, seaweed.
That's me and my brother.
You're very like her. Thank you for sharing those with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So maybe have a short break, Jet. Thank you. Thank you.